hope someday I grow up to be like Pat Heineman. He's about as inspirational and as self-actualized as anybody I know.
He's incredible, incredible. You know, I'm really curious, and I've made this story up a lot of times in telling interviews and stuff. I want to know the truth. When were you introduced to tech?
I was working at Autonetics, which was a division of Rockwell, and I got a phone call one day from a colleague that I'd known at Purdue, and that guy was Frank Sterner, and he was then working with Bob Nurse, and he was telling me what they were doing. I thought, God, that's interesting. He says, well, you guys are working in quality control and how to get the people on the line to produce a quality product. Why don't you come out and be a resource? So I went out originally as a resource. But before I went out, I met this gentleman over here, Bill Hall, through a mutual friend, and we were jogging on the beach. And he was working on his doctorate at SC, and by the time we got to the end of the beach, I was on his doctoral committee because he had all professors and he didn't have any real world people there, and he wanted somebody to protect him against the professors. So, so then the next week or so, I got this call from Sterner, and I was telling Bill about it, and he said, God, that sounds like a good idea. Maybe if you like it, to go back, take a look at it, be a resource. Maybe we ought to try that here. And so, long story short, I went back and loved it. I spoke to a tech group in, not in Milwaukee, but up in Green Bay. And the thing that fascinated me about that was that those guys, anything that they liked, they could go back and implement. And I was working in this big company, and it'd take months just to get the simplest things implemented, just due to the organization structure.
Right.
So we started out, and before the trip to San Diego to meet Pat Heineman, we had to put together a group. And Bill Hall, bless his soul, this is something most people don't know. He actually gave me part of his teaching salary. And because we didn't, you have a question there about the investors. We didn't have any investors. Right. He's the investor. He was invested in my house payment while we were getting this thing started. We were operating out of a phone booth, and we scraped up enough money for business cards and letterhead, and off we went. And that was it.
Wow. Thank you, Bill Hall.
One place they put in 2 phone booths.
We were always in one.
The manager came by and he said, "This isn't working." He put in another phone booth.
Oh, that's great. Well, tell us more about the early days. I didn't put that on the sheet here, but I'm interested to hear your stories.
Well, you know, the whole startup was a series of what I'd call gifts of trust from people. Because we by definition didn't know us. I didn't know a single CEO in Orange County. So I had to get a referral, and Bill had to get referrals. And it was basically people would trust us enough to refer a friend. And I think that's one of the things that we hope gets passed down, is that chain of trust, because this whole thing is built on that.
Absolutely. What's been your greatest learning in all these years?
Well, probably the most important one is something Bob Nurse tried to teach me. He was a master at it, and I thought I'd learned it, but I'm sort of action-oriented, and the thought of going into somebody and just listening is difficult. And I was used to coming out of the meeting, and we had action summaries, and I had an agenda, and I would go into a one-on-one, and I would start down following up on the guy. You get this done, you get that done, what are you doing here? Well, our very first member, who by the way is still in tech, Don Guild, I went in to see him, and I started my routine, and he just wasn't responding. It was like he was dead. And I thought, you know, something's wrong. So finally I had the sense to shut up. I says, Don, what's wrong? You don't seem like yourself. He said, well, my son committed suicide this weekend. And I thought, you dummy. Never, ever again will I go in and start on my agenda. So the most important thing I learned that Bob tried to teach me, and I think Don Guild finally taught me, was as Red Scott says, you have to listen until you got a hernia. You got it's not just token listening. I mean, you got to find out through a series of gentle openers where that guy is, and then you have to sync up with him. And that's kind of a secondary thing, but everybody ticks at a different speed. And finally I learned when I'm driving from one to the other, I'm trying to put myself in that world. And does he talk fast, does he move fast, does he want boom, 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 or is he real slow and reflective? And I had just tuned myself to that guy's wavelength, otherwise it didn't work.
Wow, great learning. What do you feel we should know about our heritage?
I think the most important thing about our heritage is just what I said before, is that this is built on a chain of trust. And every time we get a new member, somebody has trusted us with a friend or colleague, and we've got to deliver. And I think that chain of trust is the most important concept in our heritage.
Absolutely. What a great learning. Thank you. What message would you like to give to the elders in this room?
Well, the guys that know me around the table are probably tired of hearing this, but the reason we still have a tech group of guys that have, well, Don Guild's been in for 41 years, and over half of them have been in for 30 years, is that unlike some of my colleagues, we try and focus not on problems. And by the way, I was talking to Larry, and I'm getting suspicious of the word issue. I've never liked issue, but it's a socially acceptable term, and it's in very psychological terminology for problem. And so now they don't, people that know me well don't mention problems because they know I don't like doing that, but they still have issues. And I think the next step in our progress is to ban the word issue for a year and work on real, live, honest-to-goodness opportunities. And I think of guys like Bob Elliott, who was running a heart valve company, and he very tentatively in our one-on-one said, you know, he says, I'd like to get some ownership. He says, I don't have any money. And he said, forget I said that. He said, that would be greedy. I've got a great salary and I fly first class all over the world selling heart valves. And Mr. Shiley would be upset. I said, Bob, I don't think he'd be upset. Let's talk to the group. He says, I don't think I want to do it. So comes the group meeting. He comes up to me and says, Fred, I'd really be embarrassed to talk about that. And there's a time, it's a very sensitive thing, where you have to help your member present things a little early. Because once he's made up his mind, the groups really have no value. So I squeezed him and he said, oh, okay, well, he brought it up in the group. Every member said, he'd be honored that you were smart enough to want some equity, and he'd probably give you a soft note. Well, that all happened, and a few years later, he had 10%, and they sold that, and when he sold it, it was worth about $12 million, and if he kept the Pfizer stock, some of which he did, today it'd be worth a couple $100 million. So that was an important conversation.
Wow.
That's an example of an opportunity. It wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity.